Well, good morning. Our theme this year is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ. We're also talking about process of moving people from loving our neighbors, inviting people into our homes, or going into people's homes, people who are our neighbors, loving God, getting people to worship God, getting people here to worship as a community of believers, and then, of course, serving others. We spent this last weekend, Friday and Saturday, volunteering. A lot of you volunteered to make baked goods to help our friends in Haiti who are really struggling. On Wednesday, I gave an update for the two different organizations that we gave to. One was a church and one was Second Mile Haiti, and they've been given updates to show how that money's been used. I just received a message yesterday from my friend who is the preacher at a church in Haiti that we've been helping out, and he said, we can never thank you enough for all the ways that you helped the people. And he's been sending daily updates, pictures of people that he's been serving. He's been writing handwritten receipts for things that he's purchased with that money, from food to medicine, paying off hospital bills. And it's really incredible to see what a small group of believers can do by reaching out into the community and just asking people to join in and help. I'm super encouraged by that. Here's some pictures for those of you who've not yet been out to the Weimers, if nothing else, just to look at the lights. It's really incredible. There are 72,000 lights, and you can see the two tables stacked up end to end where Natalie's standing there. We had those tables full, and then underneath the tables we had boxes of stuff, so as people would make donations and purchase things, we would restock the table, and it was a pretty neat experience. But Natalie, you have more accurate numbers, but I know last night we brought in $175. The night before was over 200. And that was just from, what, 4 hours, less than 4 hours of volunteering out there. So again, to the Weimers, we thank you guys for opening up your home. We're going to do it again this coming weekend, Friday and Saturday, and possibly the next weekend after that. It's just encouraging to see that whenever we ask people to help, whenever there's a need, people just jump in and they don't even ask questions, they just help. And I'm greatly encouraged by that. Dave read for us this morning a genealogy. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. How are you making a sermon out of a genealogy, and why are we reading genealogies? Let's be honest, how many of you dig into your Bible and jump to the genealogies that are written in the Bible, and you're like, I have got to consume these genealogies? How many? I knew you, because I'm the same way. I wrote an entire, there's another one, that's awesome. I'm not poking fun, I'm being serious. There's another one. All right, like father, like son. I think your hand is up. Or maybe he's just stretching. I know, see, it runs in the family. I wrote a research paper back when I was in graduate school on the genealogy of Jesus, as written by Matthew. I don't know why back then. I was a lot younger, and it just, genealogies have intrigued me. And specifically the genealogy about Jesus, because, right, we asked the question, oh, there's another photo that I forgot about. This question, where did Jesus come from? I think the simplistic answer is to say, well, Jesus comes from God, right? We as Christians have all told the story. We've told the Virgin story, Virgin Mary. We read the story, the narrative about Jesus and how he was born. We know that he's the Son of God. But I don't know that many of us parents have sat down with our children and really sat through the genealogy of Jesus. So it begs the question, why, if Jesus is the Son of God, do both Matthew and Luke bother to write genealogies of Jesus? And what's their purpose? So that was kind of what sparked this research paper in my mind, because I was like, this is really curious, because Matthew spends a lot of time and a lot of ink to write down this genealogy to show where Jesus came from. And I'm gonna pause for a minute and just say it's really important for us to understand family history, right? For a number of reasons. For health-wise, that's something that we fill out forms at the doctor, right? They want to know family history. Well, why is that important? It's important because we receive genes that are passed on, and that determines a lot of times, at least to a large degree, what our health line looks like. It's also important psychologically because a lot of people have confusion surrounding their birth families. They have no idea where they came from. And that can cause a lot of confusion and havoc in the life of people who don't know. I saw an article yesterday that caught my attention, or maybe it was this morning, I don't know. Time is blending together. But there's a guy, a pastor by the name of Corey Brooks in Chicago, and 10 years ago he spent 94 days on the roof of a hotel that he purchased in inner city Chicago, in one of the most violence-ridden places. In fact, the hotel was just 2 blocks from an elementary school. This hotel was known for every single day there were homicides that happened at the hotel. Prostitution rings were running out of the hotel. And so this pastor, Corey Brooks, he decided he was going to purchase the hotel. So he went to the people, he said, how much do you want for this hotel? Well, of course, they wanted to just dump it because it was just this big liability. So he purchases the hotel, and in the dead of winter, 10 years ago, he goes on the roof of the hotel, and he sets up a tent, no other protection from the cold, and he just starts camping out for 94 days in a row. He was doing this to raise awareness and to raise enough money to level the hotel, to pave way to build a community center. And he wanted to raise awareness on the violence that's happening in Chicago. But he's not just raising awareness. What's interesting is from that effort and from the faith that he had, 10 years ago, he started what's called Project Hood, and that stands for Helping Others Obtain Destiny. He created a violence impact team. These are people who spent time in prison for homicides. They were violent people who were reformed. They got out of prison, and they lead this violence impact team. And in Chicago, a big thing is retaliation homicides. Gangs fight gangs, and all people know is violence in some of these areas. And Corey Brooks talks about that. He said a lot of these kids, in fact, all the kids, he starts with this. He says all the kids don't have a choice for who they pick as parents. They don't have a choice who their mother is. They don't have a choice who their father is. And so they're born into these families, and all they know is violence. And so there are these retaliation killings. So he assembled this violence impact team, and what they do is they prevent retaliation killings. When they hear that there's going to be a retaliation, they go into the homes of people and they educate them. And interestingly, they prevent 50 retaliation killings a month in Chicago. Just this team alone. That's incredible. But he also assembles trauma teams, and these trauma teams go into the community and they teach people how to process these deaths. When they witness violence, when that's all they see are these shootings out on the streets, and they witness family members being murdered, he assembles these trauma teams and he's teaching them about Christ in the process. I think it's really incredible. But the point is this. He says it's really important for people to have an understanding of where they came from, regardless of your past, because we need to know where we're going. And I think that's a lot of a big reason why Matthew spends so much time formulating the genealogy the way that he does. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning, because it's really fascinating to me what he does. First of all, he alludes to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4 and chapter 5 verse 1. Here's what those passages say. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. It begins with this genealogy of Adam and Eve. And all the attribution goes to God. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. God planned this from the beginning. Before there was time as we know it, God planned this out. He marked it out. And that's important when we understand the birth of Christ. That this wasn't some whimsical, like, oh no, the world is really starting to fall apart. I'm going to send this miraculous birth and I'm going to birth my son. God planned Jesus' birth since before there was time. And think about that for a minute. And then chapter 5, verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. We're made in the likeness of God. That's why these genealogies are important for Jesus Christ. What's interesting to me and what really caught my attention in Matthew's genealogy, it departs from Luke's, but Matthew is a math nerd. He was a tax collector, and so he likes numbers, and he does these really funky things with numbers all throughout his gospel, but we see it really especially in his genealogy, and here's what he does with it. He structures it in a way where there's 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the exile, and 14 generations from the exile to Christ. Now, he has a lot of flexibility to be able to do that, so he drops names out, obviously. God didn't put this in perfect thirds, but Matthew arranges it so that there are 3 sets of 14. Well, we know that in Judaism, 7 is a perfect number. It means something is complete, it's whole, it's perfect. So twice 7 are the genealogies, and he separates them into 14 generations. So 14, 14, 14 for these major events. Abraham to David. David, of course, is promised through the scriptures that there's going to be this Messiah that comes through his kingdom. It's going to come through David. So this is really significant. So 14 generations, Abraham to David, and then David to the exile. The exile is going back to the Exodus, and it kind of mirrors that whenever the Israelites were under oppression. And I'm getting some help here. Whenever they go out of the exile, it goes back to Egypt whenever God rescued the Israelites out of Egypt. God saved them, he rescued them. And then, of course, the exile to Christ when the Messiah comes. What's interesting that Matthew does, he puts David as the 14th name. So David winds up right smack in the middle of the genealogy, but Matthew doesn't stop there. Matthew uses, which was really common in Judaism, he uses gematria. Gematria is when you assign numbers to each of the letters of the alphabet. So in English, for example, A would be 1, B would be 2, and so on. So there are no vowels in the Hebrew language. And so the D and the W and the D, that's assigned 14 characters. David is 14. It's a complete number. Matthew puts it right centered in the middle of this genealogy. Matthew doesn't stop there. Matthew does something that's very different from what Luke does. Matthew includes a series of women in genealogies, which wasn't real common in Judaism. Typically, you listed all the males, but Matthew includes these women, and he includes 5 women, including Mary. And what's fascinating is that Matthew includes women who have these scandals in their life. And we're going to talk about these women. I don't know if they jumped out at you when Dave was reading the genealogy, but we're going to talk about each of these today. The genealogy of Jesus Christ. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar. Here's the first woman. We're going to pause here for a second. What do you know about Tamar? Do you remember Tamar? Well, Tamar was the daughter-in-law to Judah. She married Judah's first son, Er. Er died, and then Onan, his next son, was to marry Tamar, and this was very common in antiquity. It was the responsibility of the next single brother to marry to keep that generation going. So he marries Tamar, and God ends up killing Onan. Well, the next in line was Shelah, and Shelah was the youngest brother, but he wasn't quite old enough to marry Tamar, so Judah promises his son Shelah to Tamar, and then when he's of age, Judah lied. He didn't offer his son to Tamar to be married. And so Tamar dresses herself as a prostitute when she knows that Judah is going to come, and she deceives him. They end up having 2 sons together, Perez and Zerah. And Judah, if you remember the story, it's kind of a brutal story, but Judah finds out his daughter-in-law got pregnant. Of course, doesn't know he's the father. Sounds like a bad soap opera, right? Judah doesn't know that he's the father and makes a big show of it. And he says, well, Tamar needs to be not just killed, but she needs to be burned alive. Pretty brutal, isn't it? My nickname for Judah is Judah the Jerk. He's incredibly terrible. He's just a terrible person. So Matthew highlights Tamar. One of her sons, Perez, ends up being the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab. Well, what do you know about Rahab? Rahab, the prostitute. Yeah, or harlot. She's the one that was up on the wall, and she ended up spilling her guts and telling the spies what was going on. And so Rahab was spared. Rahab has Boaz. Boaz is the father of Obed by Ruth. Also, is there another theme that you're seeing with these women? You know who they don't belong to? Israel. They're Gentile women. Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. Right? There's this perfection, right? Number 14 in the middle, perfection. Do you think we're going to get perfection from David? Well, not according to Matthew. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of, not David, by the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba. Of course, we all know that story as well. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. And of course, that was a big scandal in their day. Because Joseph and Mary were not married. She becomes pregnant. Joseph, of course, wanted to divorce her quietly. The Bible uses the term divorce because you enter a formal agreement when you're engaged, and it's much like a marriage. It's this contract between the two of you. And Joseph is thinking, well, she must have gotten pregnant by someone. It wasn't me. I'm going to put her away quietly to spare her from all kinds of trouble. It was actually an act of grace. Finds out later on that there's a reason why she was pregnant, of whom Jesus was born, who was called Christ, Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Now, this is important. Why does Matthew go out of his way to lay out the genealogy of our Messiah like this? Why didn't he just go right in and say, all right, here's the narrative of how Mary became pregnant. It was this miraculous birth, and Jesus is the Son of God. Why didn't he do that? Why did he go to great measures to formulate this genealogy and to arrange it the way that he did, and to put these women in there? He didn't shy away from it, did he? He put them right into the genealogy. Here's the conclusion that I came up in my paper. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know. So this is not like, this is fact, and this is exactly what Matthew did. But the conclusion that I came up with was, one, Matthew is not highlighting the scandals with these women. Though there were scandals certainly in their background, and Matthew doesn't shy away from that, that's not his purpose. One of the themes that we see with these women is that they were initiators. They stepped out in faith despite how badly they messed up and the men involved in their lives messed up. I mean, because it's not just the women. And I think we sometimes are guilty of that. We're like, these women, really it was the men in their lives who screwed up even worse. But that's not Matthew's point. Matthew's point in including them is to say, these were people who were part of God's plan from the very beginning who were worthy. Gentile women who stepped out in faithfulness. They initiated faithfulness and they obeyed God. These women obeyed God. They were faithful. Judah says of Tamar, "You're more righteous than I am." Rahab is commended for her righteousness, right? She's commended for her righteousness. And I think what Matthew is doing is he's showing that we're so nearsighted a lot of times. And we're quick to point the finger. We're quick to point at people and be like, no, like, we want to clean this up, right? Don't we do that with our own family sometimes? Like certain family members, we get out the eraser and we're like cleaning up their lives. And we're trying to make it look all presentable because that ends up, their mistakes end up being a reflection on us. So we're like sanitizing their life, and we present that to people. And we do this all the time, right? With social media, people do this all the time. Not many people are posting pictures of their really horrific moments in life and all the big mistakes that they make. They're not posting that online. They're cleaning up their life, they're sanitizing it, they're editing, and they're showing all the glory and all the splendor and all the great things and all the fun vacations and all the times they smile. They're posting those things on social media. Matthew chooses to not do that. Matthew tells the story of Jesus' birth by saying God planned the Messiah since the beginning of time. And God uses people who might surprise us as part of his plan of salvation. Jesus came through this line of kings and of powerful people that were also involved in life. People's lives are messy. And I think sometimes we forget that. And as Christians, we beat ourselves up and we're like, man, I made a mistake. And the irony is that Jesus Christ came to save us because of our sins. And sometimes we're like, I sin too much. Jesus can't save somebody like me. And I think Matthew, part of what he's doing is he's showing these people who have these scandals in their lives to say, it's okay. Like, it's all right to be born into a family of misfits. It's okay to be born in scandals. It's okay to not know who your parents are sometimes. These people in Chicago, my heart breaks for all these kids who are growing up in these violent homes. Many of these kids have no idea who their parents are. And I think Matthew is screaming through his genealogy that it's okay. And as we think about the birth of Christ, I don't want us to clean this all up for our kids and present this nice, perfect narrative, right? Like, have you ever gone to Christmas services at churches? My goodness, they take the bleach, they take the Clorox, and they clean it up and make it look so perfect. And you're like, wow. And it is. I mean, it's like it'll give you chills. And you're like, God is so powerful. But what they're omitting is the power of the story, which is that people make mistakes. Even in Jesus' lineage, and that's okay. God chooses to use people for his glory, in spite of ourselves. So if you're one of those people that beats yourself up and you're like, man, I'm just not worthy, that's nonsense. God uses us for his kingdom, and I think it's so powerful. The story of Jesus is so powerful, and I want us to teach our kids that it's all right to make mistakes. It's all right to screw up. It's all right to do things. That doesn't cut you off forever. That doesn't neglect God's love for you. That doesn't neglect Jesus' grace. That doesn't neglect the fact that we're all human. And that's the story of Jesus, and it's this beautiful narrative that's even woven into the genealogy of Christ. It's so cool. There's so much more to that. I could do a lot of sermons just on the genealogy, but I will spare you because it's the nerdum in me. But it's so cool. It's so powerful. And when you step back and you look at what Matthew's doing, he's pointing to God's perfect plan since before the earth was even here. It's so powerful. So let's teach our kids that that's part of the story. These women are part of the story. So we ought to include them in the birth narrative of Jesus Christ. Let's reflect on these things. Let's think of these things. Go out this week and spend time with your neighbors. Tell people about Christ. Invite people here to worship with us. Let people know that there's hope. Think of all the people who have this perfect view of who God is, and that, people in Jesus' lineage were all perfect and nobody made a mistake. And help people wipe that image away and point them back to Matthew. Teach them that it's okay to make mistakes, that God welcomes you anyway. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have any prayer needs, we would invite you to come up as we all stand and sing together.